In the 1800s, when someone died, they did not rush them away. They did not call a funeral home. They did not hand the body to professionals. They kept them in the house, sometimes in the living room, sometimes in the bedroom, sometimes for days. Death was not hidden. It was domestic. If you walked into a Victorian home after someone passed, you might see black cloth draped over mirrors. You might see the clocks stopped at the exact moment of death. You might smell flowers, heavy ones, lilies, roses, not just for beauty, for the scent. The body would be laid out on a table or a bed, dressed carefully, hands folded, family gathered around. This was called a wake. And unlike today, it did not happen in a funeral parlor. It happened where they lived, because that is where most people died. In the 19th century, hospitals were rare and often feared. People died at home, in their own beds, surrounded by family. Children were present. Death was not shielded from them. It was witnessed. When someone passed, neighbors would come, food would arrive, candles would be lit. The body remained in the house until burial, which might take days, sometimes longer. There was no modern embalming yet. In winter, the cold helped preserve the body. In summer, things were more difficult. Ice blocks might be placed around the body, windows opened, heavy perfumes used. But no matter the season, the dead were not removed immediately. They remained part of the household. Victorian culture had a deep relationship with mourning, especially in Britain, especially during the reign of Queen Victoria. When Prince Albert died in 1861, the Queen wore black for the rest of her life. 40 years. Her grief became a national example. Mourning became ritualized, structured, visible. Widows wore full black for up to 2 years. This was called deep mourning. After that came half mourning, subtle shades of gray or lavender. Jewelry changed, bright colors disappeared. Society recognized grief publicly. It was not something hidden or rushed. And the ritual surrounding death went far beyond clothing. Mirrors were covered. Why? Some believed spirits could become trapped in reflections. Others believed it prevented the living from being startled by movement in a darkened room. Clocks were stopped at the exact time of death, a symbolic pause, as if time itself acknowledged the loss. Curtains were drawn. Photographs turned face down. The house entered a state of ritual silence. But perhaps the most unsettling practice to modern eyes was post-mortem photography. When photography became affordable in the mid-1800s, families began using it for one final portrait. Sometimes it was the only photograph ever taken of that person. The deceased would be posed, seated upright in a chair, propped carefully. Eyes sometimes painted open on the photograph, or glass eyes inserted. Children were often photographed this way. Infant mortality was tragically common. A grieving mother might hold her lifeless child for a final portrait. To modern viewers, it looks eerie, unnatural, but to them it was memory preservation, a final record of existence. Death was intimate. It was not outsourced. There was no funeral industry yet, no professional embalmer, no polished showroom of caskets. Those developments came later. The American Civil War changed everything. Thousands of soldiers died far from home. Families wanted their sons returned. Embalming became necessary. Chemical preservation methods improved rapidly. For the first time, bodies could travel long distances without rapid decomposition. This changed expectations. The body no longer had to remain in the house. It could be preserved, displayed longer, transported. And with embalming came professionals, funeral directors, undertakers, the business of death. Gradually, death moved out of the home, into specialized spaces. By the early 20th century, most middle-class families no longer kept bodies at home for extended periods. Funeral parlors replaced living rooms. The wake moved to a rented space. Grief became more private, more structured, less visible. This shift was not just practical, it was psychological. As medicine advanced, death became less common in daily life. Infant mortality declined. Life expectancy increased. Hospitals became places of healing rather than fear. Death moved behind institutional walls, and when something becomes less visible, it often becomes more frightening. Victorians did not necessarily fear death less, but they were familiar with it. Children saw grandparents die. Parents washed and dressed the body. Siblings helped prepare the room. Death was part of life's rhythm. Today, many people reach adulthood without seeing a dead body, without witnessing the moment of passing. We use softened language: passed away, lost, gone. We hide the mechanics. We sanitize it. Victorian mourning culture may seem extreme. Hair jewelry, for example. Locks of hair were woven into brooches, necklaces, bracelets. Hair was one of the few parts of the body that did not decay quickly. It became a physical keepsake, a literal piece of the person. To modern sensibilities, it feels unsettling. But consider this: we keep ashes, we keep digital photos, we keep voicemail recordings. Every era finds its method. What changed was not grief, it was proximity. The more death moved away from the household, the more it became clinical, professional, managed. In earlier centuries, a person's final image was the memory of them lying in a quiet room, candles flickering, family gathered, time paused. It was not theatrical, it was ordinary. And that ordinariness is what feels so foreign today, because modern life does not accommodate stillness easily. Victorian homes did. They stopped. They waited. They watched. There were, of course, darker realities. Bodies decay, even with ice and flowers. There are accounts of summer wakes that became unbearable, accounts of fainting visitors, accounts of hurried burials when preservation failed. Not every experience was peaceful, but the ritual mattered. It gave structure to grief, and structure makes pain survivable. As industrialization advanced, efficiency began shaping even death. Faster burials, professional handling, standardized practices. The body became less personal, more procedural, and something subtle shifted. When death leaves the home, it leaves the everyday consciousness. When it becomes rare in daily life, it becomes abstract, and abstraction breeds fear. Victorian mourning may seem morbid, but it was also honest. They acknowledged the body. They acknowledged the stillness. They acknowledged that life had stopped. In modern culture, we often rush through that acknowledgement. 3 days of services, a brief gathering, then back to work, back to normal. But grief does not move on a schedule. The Victorian era built space for it. Years of black clothing, visible sorrow, community recognition. Today, we might call that excessive, but perhaps it was simply slower, more patient. When we look at old post-mortem photographs, we see something haunting. But the families saw something else. They saw remembrance. They saw permanence. They saw proof that someone had been here, that they existed, that they mattered. Death has always been part of human life. What changes is how close we allow it to remain. In the 1800s, it sat in the living room. Today, it sits behind hospital doors and funeral home walls. Neither approach is perfect. Neither approach eliminates pain. But one is closer. And closeness changes perspective. Imagine a quiet Victorian home. Candles burning low. Clocks stopped. Mirrors covered. A family sitting in silence beside someone they loved. Not hiding from it, not rushing it, simply present. Death was not a spectacle. It was not sensational. It was not a horror story. It was a chapter, and chapters were read slowly. Today, we prefer not to look too long, but history reminds us, for most of human existence, death was not something you sent away. It was something you sat beside and waited with.
History is stranger than you think. From forgotten battles to bizarre inventions, we uncover the stories that make you say, "What the history?"